Well, good afternoon, fellow constitutionalists, and welcome to the Wednesday edition of the Dan Clements Show, a Christian political talk show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior, fighting for your right just to be an American. It is October 18th in the year of our Lord 2017. Remember, we're a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control, and He does love you. And we do what we do here at the Dan Clements Show. Knowing the fear of the Lord, we persuade folks of the truth. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios in the beautiful central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. Oh my, my brain hurts. my brain literally hurts, folks. It really, really does. I have been for the past, I think since Saturday afternoon, evening, trying to wrap my brain around what intersectional feminism is, what their thoughts and ideas are. I've been watching videos, mostly videos. I've been reading some articles, but I've been watching videos from both sides of the equation. I've been watching videos from those who support intersectional feminism, and we'll talk about it. It has a lot to do with freedoms, liberties, and rights. And I was kind of surprised to see that. However, what I wasn't surprised to see, because of who, and I'm talking about politically, I'm not talking, the only aspect I'm talking about here is politically, those who follow a specific political philosophy. I don't care what your gender is or any other identifying factors. We talked about identity politics yesterday on the show. So I wasn't surprised to see their ideas of liberty and justice. I really wasn't. And then I was looking on those who actually have a counterpoint to the intersectional feminism or third wave feminism or equality feminism, as some. There's a whole bunch of different names, and we're going to go over. I have an article here. It's intersectional feminism for beginners. It's intersectional feminism 101, in other words. And we're going to go over, we're not going to, it's kind of a long thing. I'm just going to hit the highlights of it to show you how fractured that ideology is. It really is. And if you try to follow it too much, one, it'll bend your brain. Like I said, mine hurts from trying to follow all this. Two, in following all of this, I've been accused, I made comments on a video by Dr. Christy Winters. She is one of these intersectional feminists. And I was listening to a podcast, and I was commenting on points as they were coming up on the podcast. And it seems like I was the only one that listened to the podcast, including Dr. Christy Winters, because she was asking me questions saying that's not what she said in a podcast, but when you go back in a podcast and listen to it, that's exactly what she was saying. That's why I asked the question, or I made the comments. Again, it's that whole joke. Do you hear the words that are coming out of your mouth? Do you read the words that you're typing on your keyboard? Things like that. And there was a lot of accusations going around. I was asking legitimate questions and making legitimate comments about what I was hearing. And instead of somebody explaining what I got wrong, all I got was attacked. Oh, you're making authoritative claims here. What is your authority? Sounds a little bit, I'm not comparing myself to Jesus, don't get me wrong here, but it sounds like the same question that the Sanhedrin asked Jesus. Is by what authority do you do these things that you do? And Jesus says, I'll ask you a question, and if you answer that, then I'll answer you. And he said, John's baptism, was that from men or from God? Oh, man. Simple question, right? Simple question. But the Sanhedrin, well, if we say it's from man, the crowd viewed John as a prophet, so they might do something to us. And if we say it's from God, then Jesus will say, well, why didn't you follow it? And their answer came back, I don't know. We don't know. And Jesus said, well, neither do I tell you where I derive my authority. That was a simple question that actually located these folks in the area where they were at. Actually defined them. They defined themselves. So I've been going over this, folks, trying to figure out what all this means. And it does have something to do with liberty and justice, and I entitled the show today, Liberty and Justice for All. But my point in talking about all this and bringing up intersectional feminism, we're going to go over this. I have a video on here from Christine Hoff Summers talking about intersectional feminism. She actually makes a good argument against it and actually defines it the best I've seen it defined. I'll have a chart that I'll actually show you on, obviously the folks over on Blog Talk Radio won't be able to see that, but I'll have a chart set up. I'll have a chart I'll show you on YouTube where it's an intersectional. It may not be the best one, but it's, for me, it explains a whole lot. And there is... Again, I think we do a disservice to the terms liberty and justice when we try to define them by today's standards, instead of going back and defining them before the progressive era. And I do mean not era, error, that started back in the early 1900s, like 1913 or thereabouts, and up to the present day. There has been a grave injustice done to not only American people, but to mankind in and of itself with progressivism and the redefining of terms. Now, I went to bed last night without some answers to some questions, which I do on Facebook, and I'll do that elsewhere because I'm not going to stay up all night answering these. I do have to get some sleep. You know, I got to keep these good looks up somehow, right? Like this morning, while I was waiting for some phone calls back from some financial institutions we're dealing with, I read this one answer to a statement I made, talking about, you know, the way intersectional, and we'll go over this and hopefully you might see it. And if I'm all wrong, someone needs to please step out and tell me I'm all wrong, but they need to be persuasive in their arguments, not just saying, well, you're just wrong, and you know, again, I was accused of making authoritative claims, and I said, no, you misconstrued observational claims with authoritative claims. I'm observing these things and making comments on it or making claims against them. It's totally different, and that's something, you know, it's something anybody can do. Anybody can do authoritative claims. If they are authoritative in nature, if they have that background. But anybody can make observational claims without having the educational background these people think you need. And again, let me stress this. Just because you have a college degree, all the way up from a bachelor's degree or even an associate's degree, all the way up to a doctorate in a certain field, doesn't necessarily mean that you are educated. Doesn't necessarily mean you're educated. Some folks are indoctrinated, and it comes out in their ideology, and that's what I'm pointing out. Yesterday, like I said, yesterday on the show, we talked about identity politics. And I had a person, I can't tell, they use avatars, so I don't know if it's a man or woman, don't really care. But they came out and said, well, identity politics are just tools. You know, what you call identity politics is just a tool. You know, it's not a ideology. I'm like, whoa, back up the horses here a second. How in the world do you have tools that you're going to implement to take care of whatever you want to take care of? Let's say it's just liberty and justice for all, without having an overriding theory or ideology that actually directs how those tools are used. These are some of the comments I'm getting, folks. Now, they, on the surface, when you read them and don't dig down into them, yeah, they sound pretty intelligent. But when you dig down into them and actually start applying some common sense and logic, the Socratic method, you know, what do they mean by this? Why did they say this? They fall apart. Almost every, and I can't show you because I don't want to show you the avatars and everything. And if you don't trust me, we can sit down privately and I can show you these things. I'll set them up where I can didact the avatars and everything and show you the conversations. But hopefully I've gained your trust as a listening audience that may not be necessary for me to show you these things. And I'm not showing these to puff myself up. But the worst argument that I got thrown at me overnight that I answered this morning was, and they deal with this, there are folks of privilege, and then there are folks that are being oppressed. And one of the overriding ideologies or ideas that they have, if you want to break it down to that, is that some folks, especially those in the privileged class, which that is so subjective it isn't even funny, their rights have to be restricted so the folks in the oppressed class can catch up. And yet they want to talk. He or she, the person was really criticizing me for not understanding the principles of freedom and liberty, and in the same comment made that asinine comment that you have to restrict rights and liberties, freedoms of the privileged class in order for the oppressed class to catch up. And I go back immediately. Boom! It went right in my mind. In the mornings, I'm a little clearer than in the afternoons or evenings. It went right back to George W. Bush before they started spending TARP money on the economy. When he was sitting in that interview, we have to abandon free market principles to save the free market. We have to government-fy the economy in order to save it. You know, that kind of ideology. And that was asinine when he said that. How in the world do you abandon something in order to fix it? In order for the free market to fix itself, you need to get the government intrusion, the participatory fascism that is going on in the United States. You have to get the government control out of the economy and let the free markets fix themselves. That is the best fix to fixing the free market. Like I said, when he said that, even back then I'm thinking, what in the world is he talking about? You got to abandon free market principles to save the free market. You have to restrict the freedoms, rights, and liberties of the privileged class in order to save the oppressed class. Therefore, bringing liberty and freedom to most people. And again, I just wonder if these people actually read or listen to what they're saying. And honestly, folks, I don't. I don't think they understand what they're saying. Now, I may not get in the academic language, as Dr. Winters said. She goes, well, I use this academic language. And I'm thinking, if you use an academic language, you're failing because I understand you. Okay? And again, I have to go back and look at what her doctorate's in. She gives this whole string of things that she has. But what her doctorate is, but folks, if she is an example of somebody that's educated in feminism and women's studies, they're doomed. They are doomed. Because I look at folks like Christy Hoff Summers, and it's almost like a breath of fresh air. That I'm going to show you this video. It's about an 8-minute video. I'm going to wrap up my monologue here real quick and get on to the rest of the show here. But I want to show you this first off. We're going to talk about Adam Smith's concept of justice first, right after this video. I want to get this video out of the way. So I want your mindset on what intersectional feminism is, what they're talking about. You know, they want freedom and liberty and justice for the oppressed class, but they talk about it at the expense of the privileged class, which they try to define it, but to me it sounds flat, always falls flat. And the reason why, and I put this out yesterday on purpose about identity politics on this particular feed on this video, and they come back at me and they said, I said, you identify me as a Christian warrior, and there was a couple other things in there, but mainly as Christian warrior. Because I said, for you to identify me that, I was talking, matter of fact, Dr. Winters actually replied to me. I said, it sounds funny to my ears. And then the race was on. The rest of them were like, well, you identify yourself as a Christian warrior. I said, yes, I do, but what does that mean to you? And all I got back, besides crickets, was, well, no, you're the one that has to define that. I'm like, no. You're missing the whole point of this. You're missing the whole point of this. I want to know what you think a Christian warrior is. I already know what a Christian warrior is. I want to know what you think it is. I want to know what you think a constitutional warrior is. And if you get stumped, I'll tell you what it is, how I define it, and how, like a Christian warrior, how the Bible defines a Christian warrior. I'll define to you how I define a constitutional warrior, someone that defends the Constitution, that doesn't, not as written, but as it was written and amended. I defend the Constitution. I defend the freedom and liberty principles that are found in it, and I'll argue when folks get it wrong. So none of them came back and gave me their definition of what a Christian warrior was. So I can see where they're coming from, and that was the whole point. I even stated that in there. I said, how in the world can you define me? And we talked about this on the show yesterday. How can you identify me with certain markers without first learning who I am and how I define those markers, if I define them at all? If I define them at all. I don't go around, I know I'm a white man. I'm about as white as you can get. But I don't define myself by that. Is that an identifying marker? Absolutely. But is that what makes up the totality of who I am as far as my ideology? No. It's a small sliver of it. Matter of fact, it is minute. It's microscopic. And for folks to divide people along these minuscule microscopic identifying points that honestly don't mean a hill of beans to who a person really is, that's a problem, folks. And that's where this intersectionalism comes into. And I'll show you the chart here real quick. I keep telling you that. I keep going on here. Do you have an idea for a website? Do you want a presence on the internet but don't know how to go about it? There are plenty of hosting sites out there. I use Bluehost. I found it. I've been on several different hosting. I've done my own coding with Joomla. I've actually went through a website where they did everything, like Squarespace. And I landed on Bluehost because I wanted a little bit more control than Squarespace would give me. Although Squarespace is a good product, I'm not saying anything. But Bluehost gave me a little bit more control. And one of the reasons why I like it is because of the plugins. It is a WordPress ready, one-click plugin. And every time I've used a plugin that's compatible with my template, I've never had a problem, folks. Never. And it's always worked fine. And if I can't get it to work, guess what? There's tutorials out there that helps you to get that working on your website so it works properly. So if you have an idea and you need some hosting service, please go to thedanclemenshow.com and click on the Bluehost widget. And it'll take you to the portal, and you'll be helping to support the show because they're an affiliate advertiser of mine. Plus, you'll see all the deals, the great deals they have, the templates, the help, the 24/7 support, the free domains, free site builders, the whole 9 yards. That'll help you get started with your idea, no matter what it is on your web presence, folks. Today's daily Bible reading comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 4 through 7. For when one says, I'm of Paul, and another, I'm of Apollos, are you not carnal? Who then is Paul and who is Apollos? But ministers through whom you believed, as the Lord gave to each one. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So then neither he who plants is anything, nor he who waters, but God who gives the increase. And I like this because there's so many divisions in Christianity today because of this type of ideology. Well, I'm of Paul, or I'm of Apollos. I'm of Calvin. I'm of Wesley. I'm of the Pope. Is Christ divided? Is Christ divided, folks? No, he's not. He is not. And one more point here. I got to make this. I was watching In My Pursuit of Information. I was watching a debate between Steven Crowder and Naomi Wolf, who is an avowed feminist. And she made a statement in there that Steven Crowder didn't have a chance to dispute because of her talking method. She talks in paragraphs and will not let you get a word. It's not like a give and take. She wants to dominate the conversation. And she agreed that Jesus' words had authority. But Paul the Apostle, now she's she said she was Jewish and she believes in the Jewish system, not in the Christian system. She said Paul, who came along later, well, he didn't matter because Jesus didn't say those. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul was an apostle of Jesus. Paul actually spent years in the tutelage of Jesus before he started his ministry, after his encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus. Peter tells us that God's word's inspired, God breathed, and Paul was an inspired apostle of Jesus Christ. So those words aren't Paul's; they're actually God's that were sent through Paul. So there's a huge gap of information out there, knowledge, folks, and they do not speak of what they know. They really don't. They have an idea and they come at it with these preconceived notions, and they don't know how ridiculous they sound when they pronounce these things. Today's quote mail comes from John Stott. There is evidence for the deity of Jesus. Good, strong, historical, cumulative evidence to which an honest person can subscribe without committing intellectual suicide. Some of the sites I've been listening to podcasts on with Dr. Winters are skeptical sites or skepticisms. These folks are skepticists. And they think it is intellectual suicide to believe in God and Jesus because there's no evidence. And when I point them to websites like Apologetic Press, when I point them to the biblical truths that are put out in the scriptures themselves, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. And there's a difference between committing intellectual suicide when you actually look and see the evidence and over when you don't. If you don't look and see the evidence of what's happening out there, like if there is a God, I'm sorry, you're being intellectually dishonest, not wanting to look at all sides. And I've actually had folks tell me, atheists and skeptics, that they have not read the Bible and have not read the supporting documentation like apologetics, that folks actually went and studied these things on the contradictions and on the truths that are put forth in the Bible that prove God is who he says he is. How in the world can you make a pronouncement there is no God when you don't even take the time to research whether that's true or not? Short Bible lesson today comes from Apologetics Press, Dr. David Miller. The moon is a witness. One of these things that the psalmist talks about, the moon is a witness to God and his creation. And I skimmed over it. It's a fascinating read. It really is. And I encourage you to go read that. Now, I promised I was going to talk about that. Let me get to the Adam Smith article first. And it's only a real short article, and then we'll get into the video of the intersectional feminism. What is it? Adam Smith's concept of justice. This is by Dr. Vernon Smith over at fee.org, and this was first reprinted from the Independent Institute, okay? And we talked a little bit about this, but it's kind of hurried, so let me read through this real quick. One of the best-known quotations from Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, 1776, defines natural liberty. Every man, and man is generic for mankind, okay? Every man, as long as he does not violate the laws of justice, is left perfectly free to pursue his own interest, his own way, and to bring both his industry and capital into competition with those of any other man. Smith inserted the condition so long as he does not violate the laws of justice ahead of the directive because it was central to his conception of liberty. What everyone remembers is free to pursue his own interest with the last often turned into self-interest. But Smith's conception of humanity or human society and economy, I like the word humanomics, was far deeper than modern utilitarianism. Justice is the infinite set of permissible actions remaining after specifying a finite limited set of prohibited actions and corresponding penalties. What did Smith mean by justice, and why is it so important for understanding his message? The carefully articulated answer was in his first book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. He published that back in 1759. Justice for Smith was the negative of his proposition of injustice, which stated that improperly motivated, that is, intentionally hurtful actions alone deserve punishment because they are the objects of widely shared sense of resentment. Rules that punish in proportion to resentment emerged naturally in pre-civil society as a means of defense only against real positive evil and to secure innocence and safeguard justice. Hence, justice is a residual. Justice is the infinite set of permissible actions remaining after specifying the finite limited set of prohibited actions and corresponding penalties. Imagine a large playing field in which people explore, discover, and innovate, but with well-defined foul boundaries that people are not to breach without penalty. These boundaries will change based on consent with experience, culture, and technology. Smith saw society as seeking human socio-economic betterment through the control of actions that our common experience leads us to judge as hurtful rather than through collective actions designed to achieve future conjectured benefits. The latter is uncertain and fraught with unintended consequences. Moreover, history is littered with examples of grandiose failures. The former relies on natural impulses for individuals and assemblies to pursue betterment, risking only their own resources. This framework led him to oppose slavery, colonialism, empire, mercantilism, and taxation without representation at a time when such views were unpopular. His policy views derive from the belief that every person's socio-economic achievements should depend as much as possible on merit and as little as possible on privilege. Okay? Now, let me get this video out of the way, and I have some other articles I want to read along this line of liberty and justice for all. So we get Adam Smith's idea of what justice is. You have a finite and defined set of thou shalt nots. That's what we have in the Bible, folks. That's what we have in the Constitution. That's what we had in the Enlightenment. Anything outside of that, as long as, again, you go up there, every man, as long as he does not violate the laws of justice, as long as he's not doing something that is in that finite group, is left perfectly free to pursue his own interests, his own ways, and to bring both his industry and capital into competition with those of any other man. He's not talking about selfishness here. He's not talking about individualism, that is you cordon yourself off from everybody else. You just do your own thing without any regards to society. He's talking about you bring forth or bring both industry and capital in competition with those of other men. That's how societies are built. That's how they're bettered. Somebody has an idea and somebody else looks at that idea and has another idea to make that idea better, as far as, like, let's say, mechanical things. And that's how we got where we're at today. But in a nutshell, he's talking about this non-aggression principle. You can exercise your freedom and liberties as long as you're not violating those finite do-nots, and you're not aggressing against somebody else, which would be violating those finite principles or justices. Okay? Now, again, what does all this have to do with what I'm talking about, liberty and freedom? Listen to this video. It's about 8 minutes long, and hopefully you'll get an idea where I'm coming from, where this intersectional feminism is all about. And like I said, it'll bend your brain a little bit, but Miss Summers, or Dr. Summers, explains it pretty good here.
Intersectional feminism. It's all the rage on campus and on social media. But what is it? And is its new popularity a welcome development? That's coming up next on The Factual Feminist. Suddenly, intersectionality is on the boards. News stories are turning up everywhere. Well, intersectional theory was first developed in the 1970s and 80s by a group of African-American feminist scholars and activists. They accused the women's movement of neglecting black women and of basically misunderstanding oppression. Pathologies like racism and sexism, they said, these are not separate systems. They connect, they overlap, and they create a complex arrangement of advantages and burdens. So white women, for example, are penalized by gender, but privileged by race. Black men suffer from their race, but garner advantage from their gender. But black women are in double jeopardy. They are disadvantaged by both race and gender. Well, Patricia Hill Collins, a professor at the University of Maryland and former president of the American Sociological Association, she's one of the chief architects of intersectionality theory. The textbook she co-authored describes the United States as a matrix of oppression. And beneath this veneer of freedom and opportunity, there lies a rigid system of privilege and domination. Now, most Americans don't see it, but Collins and her co-author alert students to the fact that the true nature of their society has been hidden from them. In their words, dominant forms of knowledge have been constructed largely from the experiences of the most powerful. And the text promises to introduce students to deeper, subordinated truths. That's their phrase. And they say they're going to avoid Western and masculine styles of thinking, which can obscure these truths. Well, according to the theory, those who are most oppressed have access to a deeper, more authentic knowledge about life and society. In short, members of privileged groups, especially white males, should not only check their privilege, but they should listen to those they have oppressed, because those groups possess a superior understanding of the world. Now, initially, the primary focus of intersectional feminism was on black women, but the number of victims quickly multiplied. This graphic from a popular women's studies textbook includes 14 or 15 marginalized identities. The factual feminist is concerned. Now, there are social scientists who use a sensible, non-politicized version of intersectionality to understand complex social identities. I have no quarrel with them. What concerns me is how intersectional feminism is taught and practiced on the college campus. I have many objections, but I'm just going to limit myself to 3. Problem 1, it's a conspiracy theory. I mean, if intersectionality theory were merely a reminder to be sensitive to different kinds of social advantage and disadvantage, that would be fine, but it's much more than that. It's an all-encompassing theory of human reality, constructed to be immune to criticism. If you question it, that only proves you don't understand it, or that you're just part of the problem it's seeking to correct. Now, that's why articles by skeptics almost never appear in textbooks like these. Now, certain groups, men for example, are marked as sinners with a capital P. And if they dare to question the theory, they will be told to check their privilege. Their job is to atone for their unearned advantages and to learn from those they have oppressed. Now, some men are really taking this to heart. Consider this tweet. As a dude who cares about feminism, sometimes I want to join all men, arm in arm, and then just run off a cliff and drag the whole gender into the sea. Problem 2. Victim creep. According to this theory, victimization confers wisdom, moral authority, even prestige. So in places where intersectionalists gather, on campuses and social media, there's now a mad scramble for victim status. Now, I first saw this theory in action way back in 1992 at the annual meeting of the National Women's Studies Association in Austin, Texas. Now, the conference organizers had imbibed the lessons of intersectional feminism, and they were struggling to honor all identities. So the participants were told to assemble in small groups based on their healing needs. So there were groups for Asian women, African American women, elderly women, Jewish women, disabled women, fat women. None of these groups proved stable. The fat group polarized into gay and straight factions. Members of the black lesbian group could not get along. Those who had white partners were called out for their privilege and had to form a separate group. And new identities emerged. A group of women with allergies formed a caucus and issued a set of demands about not wearing dry cleaned clothing or hairspray. It was a conference of scholars, but we didn't resolve our differences through rational discussion. Instead, intersectionality created new reasons for anger and devoured itself. The conference ended with songs and healing rituals. Problem 3, bullying. Intersectionality tells us that white males are in charge of the capitalist white supremacist patriarchy and that they enjoy most of the unearned privilege. So on many campuses, that has given marginalized victims permission to treat them badly. Ironically, members of the insider victim class now routinely do to others what they accuse the privileged class of doing to them. They stereotype, demonize, shame, and silence people. Now, what often happens with morally inflamed groups has happened here. They've begun to turn on each other. In 2014, The Nation magazine ran a story about a conference at Barnard College for feminist bloggers. Now, the participants were immediately denounced by a Twitter mob as a cabal of white opportunists, and even though it included several women of color. The very act of holding the conference was considered discriminatory. It privileged people who lived in New York City and excluded indigenous women, mothers, veterans, women who are not online. The Nation magazine quotes a participant who compared it to a Maoist hazing. Now, such hazings are now the norm in the feminist blogosphere. Now, if you have wondered why there are so many millennials on campus telling people to check their privilege, demanding trigger warnings, calling people out for microaggressions, and retreating to safe spaces, here's my theory. They're in the grips of a conspiracy theory and have succumbed to the cult of intersectionality. Now, there are human rights catastrophes that bear directly on race and gender. Black male incarceration in the United States comes to mind, as does gender apartheid in many Muslim countries. But intersectional theory isn't uniting people around urgent humanitarian crises. It's dividing rather than uniting. It's leading large numbers of talented, idealistic students at highly privileged intersections of American colleges to focus on themselves and to enact psychodramas. It's turning them inward, away from a world that needs them. Well, please let me know your thoughts on intersectional feminism in the comments section. Do you agree with my analysis? Am I missing something? If you found this video valuable, please show your support by subscribing to the series, following me on Facebook and Twitter, and thank you for watching The Factual Feminist.
All right, folks, that was Christy Hoff Summers. She's a philosophy professor. She's calls herself a second-wave feminist, and she really digs into these things. She's very intelligent, very knowledgeable, and she knows her stuff. And everything I've been reading about intersectional feminism is exactly what she said. She talks about conspiracy. She talks about victim creep. She talks about bullying. And bullying is where I'm at with all this. They want to bully the privileged class into giving up some of their privilege or their rights or their freedoms or liberties until these other classes that they perceive to be downtrodden, until they catch up with us. And again, you cannot take freedoms and liberties from somebody else, and on the pretext of allowing other people to gain those freedoms and liberties. You're going against exactly what you're saying you're preaching about, or that you want to show people that you're doing, that you're for freedom and liberty. But you white male privileged individuals don't understand freedom and liberty because you're oppressing these other people. Again, I want somebody out there, because I'm not going to be part of a group. I really am not in the way that these anti-freedom folks out there. I don't care what you call yourselves. I don't care if you call yourself a feminist, a progressive, a liberal, an intersectionalist, whatever. I'm not going to allow you to lump me in with a huge group. I've never oppressed anybody, never allowed anybody to be oppressed in my presence. But you can go back, if you could find him, you go back to elementary school, and you go back to junior high and my high school. I'll tell you exactly where I went. I was in elementary school in the Findlay City, Ohio elementary system. I took junior high there. And then from freshman to senior, I was out of Riverdale High School. I hated bullies. I hated bullies to the point that if it happened in front of me, you heard from me, And it was usually in a very forceful manner. And it usually didn't involve too many words. Okay? And it never did. And like I said, I hate bullies to this day with a passion. And I see this ideology that is infiltrating our universities and our colleges as bullying. Creating all these victim classes out there. Let me show you this real quick. If you're on YouTube, you'll see this. Creating all these classes, all these things from occupation, education, race, ethnicity, religion, language, heritage, history, immigration status, gender, family status, income, aboriginality, ability, geographic location, age, and sexuality. And there's even more than this. This is simplified. I had one on there that must have had 20 or 30 different classes that they split people up into. And so they can make all these, they can make groups out, your occupation, your education, race, ethnicity, religion, language, heritage, history. All these groups, so they can make these victimhoods out of. But it never really gets down to the root problem. Again, you can't fix the free market by abandoning free market principles. You can't fix freedom and liberty for folks by restricting freedom and liberty for other folks. It doesn't work that way. A matter of fact, while I was sitting here watching that video with y'all, I got a message back, and I'm not going to get over there and go over the whole thing, but I was telling this one individual that they were conflating rights with the ability to exercise those rights. And the person said, well, that's just needless semantics. He says, you understand perfectly well what I meant. No, I did not, because if I did, I wouldn't have said what I said. If they were very clear on what, if folks that support this type of ideology was very clear on their pronouncements, I wouldn't have had to make the statements I made, because that's exactly what they're doing. They seem to misunderstand what rights are. Rights are God-given. They're not given by government. They're not granted by government. And quite honestly, it shouldn't be governments that protect our rights. We should have protection from outside influences, like outside the country. Like, let's say another country wanting to come in and take away our rights so they can take us over. But we should be able to protect our own rights. But we have these rights before governments were ever instituted. And if someone stepped on your rights, even before government, you should have the ability to defend yourself and those rights, your liberties, and your freedoms from that aggressor. So no, it's not senseless or needless semantics. You better say what you mean and mean what you say. You need to be very clear about what you say. This is why when Dr. Winters in this interview was joking about, well, sometimes I get lost in my academic speak. No, you don't. Honestly, I believe some of these folks on purpose do this. They on purpose speak that way to make it so hard to understand that it takes so long for somebody to dig out the meaning of what you actually meant that they just give up. And honestly, I believe sometimes that's their hope. So, and these folks, they're new. They're new with me. When it comes to making points, when it comes to debating, I'm like a bulldog. I have bulldog tenacity. And I'm not saying that I hang on to my ideas with such a degree, like a bulldog would, that I would never change my opinions or my mind. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, when I find the truth, when I find facts, I'll hold on to them until someone shows me another set of truths and facts that actually contradict that. And then I have a conundrum, I have a decision I have to make. But until that time, I'll hold on to the facts and truths as I found them, through listening, through watching YouTubes, listening to podcasts, reading articles, talking to other folks on social media about these ideas, and formulating my opinions about something or my ideas about something. And this whole and folks, this isn't just this intersectional feminism movement. This is the whole anti-freedom progressive movement that we have in the United States today. It is predicated on this idea of intersectionalism. Progressivism is to go out and right all the world's wrongs. One of the major ones in the past few years has been Obamacare. Oh, we have to right all these wrongs that these people do not have health insurance, do not have access to health care. And I've asked this question, and this is one of these questions they leave totally alone, because I think if they answer it, it'll blow up their ideology. How many people have you gone out and talked to that you deem to be oppressed, ask them if they feel oppressed, and if they do you want me to do something about your oppression? And I've yet to have anybody even respond to that question. And I think it's a legitimate question. Because I know people that if they had their choice, they would never go to a doctor. I got one living next door to me, my father-in-law. He hates doctors. You have to pretty much drag him kicking and screaming, or he has to be on the verge of his deathbed in order to go to a doctor. And yet we have a group of people out there that presume that he needs health care and he needs a doctor without even asking him if he even wants them to begin with. Hopefully you understand where I'm coming from when I'm making these arguments here. And if you're going to get into a discussion with me and I put forth a proposition, or I ask a question, or I put forth an idea, you ought to at least have the courtesy to answer that. Or at least come back and say, well, I'm not going to deal with that. At least you're being honest. Just not dealing with it whatsoever is intellectually dishonest. Okay. So we know, and if you want more of that, I'll put the link up. I didn't get a chance to put it in the show notes yet. I'll put the show notes link up to that video. And it's basically intersectional feminism. What is it? And this is by the Factual Feminist. And I was accused in this thread, this talk thread on this, a comment thread on this YouTube video, I was accused of only listening to sides I agree with. And that's not what I said in my comments up there. I said I've been looking at all sides. Matter of fact, I was on a thread of a video of someone I disagree with. But I was willing to listen to her side of the story. I'm in the comments thread on this video, and this person has the audacity to tell me I'm only listening and watching things that I agree with. And I'm like, do you hear the words that are coming out of your mouth? It's ridiculous, folks. It really, really is. Now, let me get over to this. I have this article here that's going to explain a little bit more. Then if I have time, I'll get into that intersectional feminism 101. If not, we'll save that for tomorrow. Lord willing, the creeks don't rise. We always have tomorrow, right? All right. This is an article. Let me get it up here first, and then I'll go over to the reading mode. This is an article here from ethicsdaily.com, challenging people of faith to advance the common good. And this is by Barry Howard, posted on July 9th, 2015. Okay? Just so you know that I try to do this because I've had people say, well, you're just reprinting an article. We're not sure if you've made that up or not. So I go back to the actual web page and show you the actual web page. What our founders meant by liberty and justice for all. The last words of the pledge are perhaps some of the most countercultural words of commitment we can speak, with liberty and justice for all, Howard says. And he'll repeat this later on down in the article here. He said, I have observed our congregation's students standing attentively as they I had this word earlier. You ever see a word that just, you know what it is? Enthusiastically. I got it. Declared, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America during Vacation Bible School. We often recite these words in classrooms and civic gatherings. When we pronounce the pledge, is it merely an obligatory ritual, or do we listen attentively to all the words and take them seriously? The last words of the pledge are perhaps some of the most countercultural words of commitment we can speak, with liberty and justice for all. Our ancestors envisioned a nation wherein liberty and justice would be for all people. For some, however, liberty has been reduced to a license of self-centeredness, and justice has been diminished to merely retaliatory or punitive action. Although dictionaries routinely define liberty as a state of being free, liberty involves much more. The historical American concept of liberty is not that one is free to do as one pleases without accountability for the consequences of one's actions. We don't live in a vacuum, folks, in other words. Rather, our heritage of liberty means that we are not owned or enslaved by another person or power. Popular pastor and author John Ortberg reminds us real freedom is not the external freedom to gratify every appetite. It's the internal freedom not to be enslaved by our appetites. In other words, our individual and corporate freedom exists within the boundaries of ethical and moral responsibility. True liberty calls on us to express ourselves with civility and to respect the rights of those who think differently to do the same. Justice is commonly perceived as the assignment of merited rewards or punishment. But the Old Testament prophets, especially Amos, knew that justice is more than being affirmed for right behavior or punished for bad behavior. Justice strives to create viable opportunities for all persons to succeed economically, vocationally, and socially. Real justice seeks to create opportunities for the disadvantaged. The Bible gives us many examples of the disadvantaged: the poor, the widows, the orphans, the sick, strangers, the hungry, the homeless, and those in prison. In the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance, we commit our lives to the pursuit of liberty and justice for all. The phrase "for all" is inclusive, not discriminatory. For all means we aim to provide and protect liberty and justice for all individuals, regardless of gender, race, economic status, political ideology, or religious background. To preserve liberty and justice for the privileged few is indicative of a shallow theology and an uninformed patriotism. While you and I are blessed to enjoy the privileges of freedom, many around our world still live under tyranny and can only dream of liberty and justice. Last weekend's 4th of July festivities should serve as a reminder that we must pledge ourselves to continue the work of liberty and justice for all persons in the future. Liberty and justice are not just political ideas. They are social tenets that affirm intrinsic human worth and spiritual values that reflect the image of our Creator, ultimately experienced through the liberty we find in Christ. John 8:32 declares, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." And Amos 5:24 urges, "Let justice roll on like a river." In order to truly let freedom ring, we must work together to let justice roll. Now, folks, like I said, I read that in order for you to get an understanding of where I'm coming from with this. These embody a lot of my thoughts and my ideas. Now, go back over real quick, if you're on YouTube, go back over to that image there, that slide I put up there about, and this is just a small sampling of this intersectionalism, that occupation, education, race, ethnicity. Does any of that, when you divide people up along those lines, does any of that lend to letting justice roll for all? Now, like I said, justice isn't just seeking, reward or punishment. Justice is, I have had the opportunity to do certain things in my life, and I want to make sure everybody else has that same opportunity to do the same thing and possibly more. That's justice. That's letting justice roll like a river. And I don't know if you've ever been in a river, but a river's not very discriminating. It'll drown you. I don't care what you are. I don't care what your skin color is, your occupation, your wealth, your poorness, your poverty, your gender, whatever you want to put to that. A river is very indiscriminate. It'll carry you along. It'll crush you against the rocks. It'll throw you up on the bank sometimes. And it doesn't care who you are. And that's the idea of letting justice roll on like a river. There should be none of this division. I'm of Paul. I'm of Apollos. I'm of Cephas. There should be none of this division. And this is the problem with modern day feminism, especially this third wave or this intersectional feminism. It seeks to divide first to try to take up supposed oppression. And I'm not saying there isn't any oppression, but the way they go about it and the way they explain it does not guarantee or does not put forth the idea of liberty and justice for all. It just doesn't. It more or less divides us. And that's what the problem is with it. That's the biggest problem with a lot of these things. With progressivism, with anti-freedom ideas, with restricting. You know, like I said, these folks on this thread are conflating people having rights. Every human being on the face of this earth have God-given rights. Now, whether the place where they're living, where the government and economic system that they're living under allows them to exercise those rights is a different story. And I even hate using that word allow, but that's a reality, folks. In our country, in our republic, we have these freedoms and liberties from a tyrannical government. And you can't tell me, and hopefully we're going to have this gentleman on next week from this university down in Florida, hopefully, that talk to us about participatory fascism. You can't tell me that what's happening in America today with all the regulations, with all the laws that are made to control what companies do or what capitalism does, is not a type of fascism. It's a fascism light, if anything. And it controls things. It controls people. And I don't know if anybody's ever said this, but I'm going to say this here, whether I get in trouble or not. That's exactly how I view, or how I'm starting to view. I haven't totally done all my research that I want to do, but I'm coming quickly to the conclusion that intersectional feminism, third wave feminism, is fascism light. They want to control everything. They want to control outcomes. They want to control people. They want to control people of privilege. They want to so other people that aren't privileged or they see as oppressed can be lifted up. Got to abandon free market principles to save the free market. We got to restrict freedoms and liberties of some so we can save freedoms and liberties or grant them to other people. Again, it doesn't work that way. Never has, never will. And I'm going to continue my discussion with these folks over on this YouTube channel. Matter of fact, I will put up, because it is public, I will put up that channel. I'll put the link in the show notes page. So if you go over to danclemenshow.com and click on the show notes page, you will see that video I'm talking about. Go ahead and listen to it. There is some foul language in it. I'll put that to you to begin with. There is a little bit of foul language, but you'll get to understand what she's talking about. You can go down and read some of the comments. Leave some of your own. We're winding down the show here. Hopefully you like what I do here on the Dan Clemens Show. I know I don't have a huge audience yet. I'm still building my audience, but hopefully you like what I'm doing here. If you disagree with what I'm doing here, don't like, good. Let me know that too. Give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. It doesn't matter to me. Subscribe to the show. Listen to the show. See what I'm trying to say. See what I'm trying to tell people about liberty, about freedom, and my ideas. Like I said, maybe I'm totally washed up, but folks, we got to discuss it to begin with. We can't just hide our heads in the sand and pretend things aren't happening around us. This has been the Dan Clemens Show. I'm your host, Dan Clemens, your constitutional warrior. Remember, if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. Have a great rest of the day, folks, and God bless. And we'll see you tomorrow at noon.